Henry Kissinger once said, "If you don't know where you're going, every road will get you nowhere." Well, that's not what we want to see happen in our classrooms. So it's very important for us to start out with learning objectives as we build our lesson plans. So, what are learning objectives? To understand it better, I'm going to just compare briefly learning objectives and learning outcomes. Learning objectives basically are the instructor's purpose for creating and teaching a course or a lesson, whereas learning outcomes are more from a learner's perspective. Both of them aim to state what a learner will do at the end of the learning encounter. Now, for our purpose in this lesson, we will use the ABCD rule for creating detailed objectives for a single lesson from the learner's perspective. Let's now dive straight into writing an effective learning objective. And so, before I start, I'd like to just make a couple of points. The first thing is that a learning objective is a clear statement of what the learner will be able to do at the end of the lesson. So, we want to clearly be able to write something, and around that, we can focus and build our lesson plan. So, it has to be something very clear which a learner will be able to do. It's not a wish list, it's not writing several things and then hoping for the best, but we write a clear statement and then focus on it. It should complete the sentence, "At the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to." And as an example, at the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to plot and graph demand and supply curves using Excel spreadsheets aligned to the standard economic model. Now, it looks very detailed, and it is detailed intentionally. This learning objective is based on the ABCD rule. And so let me introduce you straight away to the ABCD rule, which will help understand how we can create a really effective learning objective. So what's the ABCD rule? A stands for audience. So we focus on the audience when we write our learning objective. Whose behavior are we trying to change or transform? B is the behavior, and we want to be specific about what behavior we want to see take place and take place differently. Then comes the C, or the condition, and here we are basically looking at what are the conditions that learners will be showing these new behaviors under. What are the conditions under which they are going to be learning this new behavior? And finally, degree is the extent to which they will be able to apply or to do the new learning. So now let's just test the ABCD rule with the example of the objective that we had used earlier. So if you look at that, we had said the learners will plot and draw demand and supply curves using Excel spreadsheets aligned to the standard economic model. And so you can see that the audience A are the learners. What is the behavior that we are going to display at the end of the lesson is they will be able to plot and draw demand and supply curves. What are the conditions? Under which conditions will they be doing this? Using Excel spreadsheets. And to what degree, to what extent will they be doing it accurately? And that is, it's going to be aligned to the standard economic model. So here we have the ABCD. So let's go a little deeper as to what ABCD really means when you're sitting to craft your learning objective. So the audience, those people whose behavior we are trying to transform, and it'll be good to think about them in singular rather than as a group. When you write the objective, write the learner, the student, the participant, rather than the class or something of that sort. That's the audience. And in terms of behavior, what should the learner be able to do at the end of the lesson? So just state it simply, clearly. It has to be measurable, be able to observe it. So some examples of the words to use would be the learner should be able to list, select, compare, etc. And then the condition, and this is really important to state, under what conditions will the learner actually perform the task. You could use there either the materials which they will be using to complete the task or the equipment, etc. For example, using Excel software or playing Kahoot or given 30 minutes. So even time can be a kind of a condition under which they have to complete, or from a handout. And finally, degree, probably the most difficult element. This is because it's kind of linked to assessment. So you're assessing at the end of the lesson whether they have learned something or not. And so you need to be able to define what is an acceptable standard. And it's again something which you can actually measure. So 70% of the given list of problems within 5 minutes. So there you have it, the ABCD of writing effective learning objectives. So we end this session with an activity. You'll use your PowerPoint. Since this is online, you'll be using PowerPoint to write a learning objective using the ABCD rule for your first mini lesson, the first mini lesson that you'll be demonstrating. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to come up with this. And then after that, each of you will share your screens one by one, and we'll critique it together. Finally, you rewrite the final version of the learning objective, and then that will get into your lesson planning sheet, and that will give you a clear indication of what is expected to be achieved in the lesson. So I hope you have been able to learn something about writing learning objectives in an effective manner. And so in the chat box below, just type 2 phrases on how you feel about writing learning objectives now after this session. Thank you very much, and see you in the next session.